Hello, I went to the cinema the other day and watched Monkey Man finally, and whilst I enjoy a good documentary or some sort of think piece Oscar bait drama, I must admit a lot of the content I consume does involve some sort of fisticuffs, someone getting punched one way or another. And there I was in the cinema thinking, oh, what's going on when someone gets punched at the cellular level? Well, let's take a look at that today. Welcome to Science After Hours. The kid from Monkey Man wants to get revenge for the death of his mother. John Wick wants to get revenge for the death of his dog. John Preston wants to get revenge on the government for controlling people's emotions. And a time-displaced John Spartan wants to get revenge on an equally time-displaced Simon Phoenix. And much like a dish best served cold, they all choose a very similar way of getting their revenge: fighting. Now, the word bruise comes from the Old English word bryzan, which means to crush. But before we get to any of that, let us take a look at some of the important background information that we are going to need for this. As living organisms, we have blood inside of us pumped by the heart. And if you want a bit more information on the heart, you can go back to episode 2. And that's quite proud of that link, and not link as in URL link, but a link as in connection between two things. Although please do click on the URL and go back and watch episode 2, because it is the least popular of all of these. But anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Within the blood we have red blood cells, and these are the cells that transport oxygen around the body. Red blood cells have the ability to do this because within them they have haemoglobin. This is very much not to scale, and within haemoglobin there is a porphyrin ring, and in the centre of this porphyrin ring is an iron group, this Fe group here, and this can bind to oxygen and hold it in place until the red blood cell reaches its desired location. In most vertebrates, including us, haemoglobin is a tetramer made up of 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains that are symmetrical. The conformation, or the shape, of this quaternary structure results in what is known in the centre as this central water cavity. And you're probably thinking, oh, that's where the porphyrin ring goes, where the oxygen binds to the iron. But you would be incorrect. Each of the protein chains that make up haemoglobin each have their own porphyrin rings. You can see here in this 3D protein structure that this green structure here is the porphyrin ring that we have zoomed in on over here. But this central region allows for the haemoglobin to be quite a flexible protein, as when it is oxygenated and deoxygenated, the haemoglobin shape changes slightly due to that empty space, changing the affinity that haemoglobin has for oxygen and carbon dioxide. One conformation binds oxygen more strongly, the other binds carbon dioxide more strongly, and that is what allows for the gas exchange that we so desperately need when we breathe. So these red blood cells are travelling around the body through arteries, veins and capillaries, and then you decide to join an underground fight club where you're unable to talk about the fight club, and it appears to be run by a guy that's talking to himself. But as a result of this, and quite unsurprisingly, you get punched. And this is no light tap. You are going to get punched hard. And the force of the punch is going to break holes in the capillaries, which we have seen here. So imagine this is what is happening in the cheek here as the fist connects. And though blood from the capillaries will flow into the tissues, most frequently into the dermis and the hypodermis of the skin, as this is where there is the most connective tissue and thus the most space. That sounds simple enough, but there are 3 factors that must coalesce to result in a bruise. So obviously the first one must be that the force is strong enough to puncture the blood vessel, but weak enough not to be able to puncture the skin. That's why most bruises are as a result of a blunt force trauma rather than something like being attacked with a sword, because that's going to cut your skin and leave an open wound rather than a space for a bruise to form. The impact has to be close enough to the surface of the skin for the possibility of it being visible as a bruise, and the punched individual has to have a high enough blood pressure for the blood to pump out enough from the capillary or the broken blood vessel into the space within the skin to be able to be visible to someone else and be like, oh, you've been bruised, what happened to you? Oh, I can't talk about it. I was in an underground fight club where the guy might or might not talk to himself, and maybe something to do with terrorism. So the journey of a bruise, I'm sure as you've all experienced a bruise of some description, and that the appearance of a bruise changes over time. And I'm now sure you're expecting me to be like, oh, well, bruises are red at the beginning, and then they go blue, green, yellow, brown. But as this table here shows, the journey of a bruise is not always the same. These 5 groups here have all reported different variations in the colour of bruises at different times. So it's not an exact science, and there is no 100% agreed upon colour scheme of how the colours of a bruise relate to age. Yes, we have best estimates, and they are often used in forensic science, but generally there is no exact science. Yes, people know that bruises go from red to purple to a yellowish brown, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a red bruise equals a bruise that is days old, a brown bruise is weeks old. But that being said, the science behind why we have these colour changes is most definitely well understood, and it's a result of haemoglobin breakdown and its oxidation. So outside of the blood vessels, where there are very different pressures, the red blood cells will lyse, hemolysis. They will break apart, releasing the iron-containing haemoglobin into the extracellular environment, and this will result in the red colour that we often see in the initial stages of bruising. You know, if you've ever seen rust, rust is iron oxide, and rust has a reddish colour. So imagine a rust-esque entity building up in your skin, you're going to see that reddish tint. From here, the haemoglobin can go through multiple routes of metabolism, handily displayed in this figure here, and we are going to talk about them in a bit more depth. So let's take a closer look at the first route, which is the haemoglobin haptoglobin route. So we've got hemolysis, the red blood cells have lysed and the bruise is somewhat red in colour. Haptoglobin is an extracellular protein found in the plasma, and it has one sole purpose: binding free haemoglobin. This interaction is irreversible and protects the body from the development of damaging reactive oxygen species, as the amino acids of the protein, the haemoglobin protein, that are prone to oxidation are buried deep within the haptoglobin haemoglobin complex, so they cannot be exposed to the extracellular environment. This haptoglobin hemoglobin complex is then taken up by macrophages, cells of the immune system, by the receptor CD163, and this is here where the next stage of metabolism occurs. It is thought that the purple-blue colours of the bruise are as a result of the macrophage separating out the heme groups, which go on for this sort of route of metabolism, and the globin protein, which undergoes normal protein metabolism, being turned back into its amino acid components. The heme group begins its metabolism journey via the enzyme heme oxygenase 1, which cleaves the heme into a carbon monoxide, an iron, and a biliverdin, which is then reduced to bilirubin via the enzyme bilirubin reductase. Biliverdin has a greenish colour to it, but you may be more familiar with bilirubin, which has a yellow colour to it, as those who suffer with liver issues and experience jaundice often have high levels of bilirubin in their blood, and this is what results in the build-up of the yellow pigment that we see visible through their skin and their eyes and whatnot. So thus the bilirubin produced makes the bruise sort of yellow in colour and makes its way to the liver, for the final stages of its metabolism, where it is ultimately excreted in the urine and in the feces. The free iron that is left is from the heme oxygenase 1 is stored as the protein ferritin, which becomes partially degraded by lysosomes from the macrophage within the cell to become hemosiderin, which has a brown colour to it. Now, this brown pigment has been there throughout the green, yellow and purple stages, but as those metabolites get taken away, what is left is the brown. Often means that older bruises are somewhat brown in colour, but as I say, this is not an exact science and these are just best estimates. However, this is the best possible route for haemoglobin metabolism, as it has the lowest risk of producing those dangerous reactive oxygen species which can cause damage to DNA and the other building blocks of life. Obviously very bad for you. So the second route is the radical route, the route that is worse. Ultimately, there's no better way of saying it. So free haemoglobin can spontaneously oxidize into methemoglobin. In fact, 1 to 2% of all haemoglobin in the body is found in this methemoglobin state. And alongside the formation of methemoglobin is the formation of one of those dangerous reactive oxygen species, the superoxide anion. So we can see this reaction up here. We have on this side of the arrow the stable oxygen-bound haemoglobin with an iron 2+ ion within its porphyrin ring, and undergoing spontaneous oxidation results in this methemoglobin, which has got an iron 3+. It's become oxidized, the change from 2+ to 3+ in a charged state. And over here we have the O2 with an extra electron and therefore an overall negative charge. This is the superoxide anion, that dangerous reactive oxygen species. So a plethora of antioxidants will attempt to deal with this superoxide anion. It's one of the good reasons why you should eat blueberries, but the methemoglobin is going to go on a journey of its own, reacting with other reactive oxygen species such as hydrogen peroxide. Will produce the feral haemoglobin radical, which we see here. It's got an iron 4+. It also has an O with a 2-, and you can see, so this dot here indicates that it is a radical. So this here is the feral haemoglobin radical. It also produces a water molecule, but in fact normal stable haemoglobin can react with hydrogen peroxide to produce this feral haemoglobin radical as well. So hydrogen peroxide is a very bad reactive oxygen species in regards to haemoglobin metabolism. So we've got this feral haemoglobin ion, we've also produced some water and some oxygen. So hopefully by now you're starting to learn that radicals are damaging. So this feral haemoglobin radical can induce the formation of more methyl hemoglobin by undergoing an intramolecular electron transfer between the iron ion and the amino acids within the hemoglobin protein. So it is, in all intents and purposes, reducing itself, and that is this reaction here, reaction number 4. As you can see, we've gone from the feral hemoglobin here back down to methyl hemoglobin here with this iron 3+. Again, we have produced a water molecule. These methyl hemoglobin molecules can terminate themselves by forming a dimer with another methyl radical, which in itself isn't great, but it's better than having all of these dangerous radicals floating about. So here we can see 2 of the hemoglobin 3+ radicals coming together to produce this dimer here of the 2 3+ hemoglobin radicals. The body does have some defenses against all of this happening. So for example, the enzyme methaglobin reductase can try and step in to reduce the methemoglobin back to hemoglobin before any of this takes place. So putting a stop here at reaction number 1. So there you have it. There's a lot taking place inside blood vessels when you get punched. We haven't even discussed the blood coagulation pathway in this lecture. Perhaps there's room for that in a video in the future. But regardless of that, thank you very much for watching, and go and watch Demolition Man. It's great, holds up, fun. So that's my recommendation for you. Thank you.